Okay, Detective Maines was kind enough to give Danelle a safe space to come on and say whatever she needed. Is exactly what he said. And in that space, he asked a question, and he knows that she's lying. I can tell by the way that he asked the question. But he wasn't there to, he didn't want to badger her. But let's take a look at what he says here.
But just to that question, I'm sorry.
No, you're doing fine. I understand your position, and so I obviously want to give you a lot of space to be able to talk about whatever you need. Why do you think that they were called? I mean, going off of the wound that you just described, how did it get out there that it was a superficial wound?
Because it was said at trial. Now look at the way he's pursing his lips. How did it get out there that it was a superficial wound? He already knows the definition of superficial wound before he asked this question. How did it get out there that it was a superficial wound? He knows what a superficial wound is. He just said it. But listen to what she says.
That's a great question. So, medically trained personnel understand that superficial is a description of location in medicine. Your superior vena cava is superior to your heart, but it's still deep inside your chest. So it is used in the doctor's note, which I also have to point out was dictated after Darlie was arrested. But the note itself is dictated to reflect the word that the injury is superficial to the strapnoid muscle, which is a deeper muscle that lies kind of parallel with.
She's right. She's right. But that's not the way they were using it in this case. She's right about that note that Sandra Santos wrote. It can be used to describe where it's at, but that's not in this case because I have the direct testimony.
The jugular vein, the carotid artery, and that vagus nerve that goes through there. So that is the only place in any documentation in her medical record that uses the word superficial.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that these wounds were superficial kind of stems from that documentation. They were close to the surface in most cases. I mean, this one to her shoulder was not superficial. It actually was a deeper stab wound.
See, she's just now describing it. It's not superficial. See how she's double talking. She says, well, that one other thing, it wasn't superficial. Right? But she began this with saying, medically trained people know that what superficial means. She just tripped up right here. I didn't catch this before. I'm going to put that back.
Stems from that documentation. They were close to the surface in most cases. I mean, this one to her shoulder was not superficial. It actually was a deeper stab wound. This one to her neck, actually, according to Dr. DeMaio, who is a world-renowned.
Dr. DeMaio is a nutcase. Okay? Dr. DeMaio did not treat Darlie. Dr. Dilwan did, and Dr. Santos did. Dr. DeMaio did some work with the JFK assassination, and he claimed that the shots didn't come from the sixth floor depository. They came from the Dow Tex building across the street. That's DeMaio for you.
Forensic pathologist. He says it appears as if it is a stab wound that was kind of a continuation. So
never looked at Darlie. He's looking at pictures. And they gave a lot of shit about Alan Brantley only looking at pictures. DeMaio did not look at Darlie. He looked at the pictures of it. But now when it's convenient for them, it's okay to just look at some pictures. Alan Brantley, the FBI profiler, he looked at pictures of the scene and he made his analysis of it. And they said, oh, well, he's just looking at pictures, blah, blah, blah. Busted.
It was not attempted as, a traditional cutting of your throat, but was actually attempted as a stab wound. And Darlie at that point was trying to fight off this stab wound. So instinctually, she was defending herself. And as she pushed him away, that stab wound was kind of drug across her neck. And that's
Lord have mercy. I've never seen this.
What left the slash. And then the continuation could be from that shoulder stab wound, could be a continuation of this.
I know Ken Main is not buying this. But back to superficial, which she veered off of it.
It's kind of in a line. So it could very well be a continuation of that one motion. The forearm incision that they called an incision, an incised wound just means that it is longer than.
But you didn't describe, you're going back on what you said. So let's see.
And it is deeper, or it's wider than it is deeper. It depends on what verbiage you want to use there. But the incision itself was a little bit wider than what the depth of the wound was. And that arm was in motion when she was stabbed. So that would explain why it's a little bit wider. But it did, in fact, go to the bone. And it is on the outside of her forearm. So if you look at your forearm, it would be just like this. If I'm holding my arm up defending myself, it would be right there.
It's the inside. Danelle, you're showing a different version.
That visible area. And for her to have done that herself, she would have had to use her non-dominant hand and turn her arm almost like, see my hands like this. She would have almost had to turn her arm like this and inflicted that incision if she were to do it herself.
She completely got away from what the superficial is.
The wound on the neck is in zone 2. This is medical stuff. It's in zone 2. And zone 2, the definition of a deep wound is any puncture that penetrates through the platysmus muscle. According to the medical definition of a deep wound in zone 2 of your neck, that was a deep wound.
That's not what you're saying. Let's go back here. I want to go back to the beginning where she starts. She completely veered off of it.
Understand your position, and so I obviously want to give you a lot of space to be able to talk about whatever you need. Why do you think that they're called going off of the wound that you just described, how did it get out there that it was a superficial wound?
That's a great question.
And she's not going to answer it. Superficial wounds were described all the way through the medical. They were described on the stand.
Medically trained personnel understand that superficial is a description of location in medicine.
She said superficial means location. But then she slips up and says that one wound isn't superficial on her shoulder. But anyways, let's take a look. Yeah, okay, what I mean by that is superficial is, in effect, many ways, to a medically trained professional, a term of art, meaning that a cut was superficial to a structure, on top of, next to, meaning it came to a structure, but it didn't nick or cut the structure. Is that right? Now, this question is being asked to Dr. Dilwan, and he wanted to clear up it's a question. It's not a statement. This is not Dilwan saying it, okay? So it's being asked to Dr. Dilwan, all right? Is that true? Superficial is, in effect, in many ways, to medically trained professional, a term of art, meaning that a cut was superficial to a structure, meaning it came to a structure, but it didn't nick or cut the structure. Is that true? Is that right? Listen to what has been said. The doctor says, "Did you say term of art?" Well, it's a medical term in some respects. In some respects. In some respects. when you say, is it not true, doctor, when you say it's superficial to the platysma or superficial to the carotid sheath, that it nicked it and didn't totally obstruct it? That's a different use of the word. Coming from a doctor that was there with Darlie. That's a different use of the word, superficial. When you describe a superficial wound, it means that it is superficial and not deep. A minor wound. You weren't describing it in relation to any structure. You're describing it in relation to the wound itself, which is exactly what I said before I looked up this testimony. Misinformation is what's being spread. Superficial all through this trial had meant minor abrasive wounds, not the direction of it. And when a doctor says, that's a different use of the word superficial. And she's a nurse. Well, there's a doctor. As long as that misinformation is being spread out here, I'm going to be here to give you the facts. I'm not trying to piss anybody off. See, the fact of the matter is you wouldn't be mad at me. You'd be mad at this. The facts. Justice for Devin and Damon.
I obviously want to give you a lot of space to be able to talk about whatever you need. Why do you think that they were called, going off of the wound that you just described, how did it get out there that it was a superficial wound?
That's a great question. So medically trained personnel understand that superficial is a description of location in medicine.
Medically trained personnel understand. But this doctor says, platysma or superficial to the carotid. In many ways to medically trained personnel. He's saying it does it mean it's superficial to a structure? That's a different use of the word superficial. You're a fibber, Danelle. That's why you're looking down. You're looking down at the ground. You're searching for an answer. That's criminal profiling. When you look away while you're giving an answer, or you look downwards while you're giving an answer, you're searching for an answer. That's criminal profiling. Ken Mays will tell you that.
Superior vena cava is superior to your heart, but it's still deep inside your chest. So it is used in the doctor's note, which I also have to point out was dictated after Darlie was arrested. But the note itself is dictated to reflect the word that the injury is superficial to the strapnoid muscle. Which
Now, here's the way Ken Mains knows that word. And I'm just looking at an AYI overview on it. First search on Google. What is a superficial wound? A superficial wound is a skin injury that only affects the top layer of the skin, epidermis, essentially a surface level scrape or abrasion, and does not penetrate deeper into the underlying tissues or like muscle or fat. Typically caused by friction against a rough surface and not causing significant bleeding. Limited depth, which that wound was not that deep. Scrapes, grazes, minor cuts. Usually caused by friction or rubbing against a rough surface, blah, blah, blah. Typically heals without scarring. Darlie didn't have to have stitches to seal that wound up. She had sutures to seal that wound up. Sutures. So it could heal. It did leave a scar, but it did not need stitches. Typically. When we go a little further, Toby Shook is asking Dr. Dilwan, who actually treated Darlie. Dr. Dilwan. Mr. Douglas asked you some questions about the cut and jugular vein. Did Darlie Routier have any of those injuries? No. And you said something about a sheath. Yes, there's a carotid sheath that surrounds two vessels, the internal jugular vein, the carotid artery, and a large nerve called the vagus nerve. That's just a fibrous structure in the neck that's continuous with other fibrous material that would sort of hold you together. There was no cut to her jugular or carotid artery or anything like that, was there? No. And in layman's terms, the skin was cut, the fat was cut, and the platysma, which is the fat. Is that right? Yes. That's it. And that was it. That was it. On cross by Preston Douglas, Dr. Dilwan, just below that, is being asked. Okay, but answer my question. And my question is, based upon your training and experience, could have been 2 or 3 millimeters? I don't know. I just saw the sheath. Okay, so you're saying no. You're saying you just don't know. I have stated that the wound was superficial and did not damage it. It damaged no significant structures at a small point. The carotid sheath was exposed. The carotid artery was not exposed. So you're saying the instrument made the cut down to that depth? Yes, it did. Okay, that's all I have. Nothing further. The wound was superficial. It damaged no significant structures.